The Mystery of the Cupboard, Chapter 15, In the Cashbox. Just as he'd expected, a number of finger-sized parcels lay at the bottom. 5 of them. The wrappings on all but one were small folded ladies' handkerchiefs that had been white. They were a stained beige now. Some air and damp must have got in after all. Losing no time, Omri swiftly picked up the first parcel. He unrolled it, quickly but carefully. It was like unrolling a tiny rug that had someone in the middle. The figure inside it sat up slowly, shaking its head between its bent knees. It was a man, and he had white hair. Omri took time to notice no more than this. He was already unrolling the second and the third. The fourth roll had nobody in it. He felt that as soon as he picked it up. When he unrolled it, he found it empty, except for some items of uniform. He knew what that meant. It had been the same with Tommy. The wearer had been a soldier, who, since last time he was brought, had died in action in his own time. Omri noticed the uniform was not khaki, but red and blue. Some older army era. Anyway, there was no point wasting time on that now. He didn't bother either with the last little package. Unlike the others, it was carelessly wrapped in a twist of brown paper. It must be the earrings. Though he was longing to see these, there would be time for them later. He turned back to the little people. The first thing he noticed was that 2 of them were men, and one was a woman. The man Omri had unrolled first was just getting stiffly to his feet in the midst of the crumpled lace-edged handkerchief. He was wearing rather heavy-looking dark blue trousers, a shirt without a collar, a wide leather belt, and braces over his shoulders. He wore slippers on his feet, and his snowy hair was tousled as if he'd been woken from a nap. He was holding a tiny newspaper. The other man was already on his feet, kicking the folds of linen impatiently aside. He was shorter than the other one, very thin and wiry, and looked quite a bit younger. His bristly hair was only just going gray. He wore a high-necked black sweater, dark checkered trousers, and a cloth cap. And he had what appeared to be a sack full of heavy, lumpy objects clutched in his hand. Where the other older man seemed dazed, this one was looking all around him warily with quick bird-like movements of the head. The woman looked older than either of them. She was plump, with white hair done up in curling papers, and an old-fashioned patchwork dressing gown over what looked like a long white nightie. She seemed neither dazed nor weary, but outraged. "For heaven's sake!" she exclaimed irritably. "This is too much, it really is. Just as I thought my bad knee was in for an early night. Here we go again without a word of warning or so much as a by your leave. I'm too old for all this coming and going." She looked around and caught sight of the older man, who was rubbing his hand over his chin with a just about audible rasping noise. "My God, it's you, Ted!" she exclaimed, after clapping her hands to her fat cheeks. "After all these years! Now I know I'm not dreaming, I'm back." "Hello, Essie," said the older man slowly. "Yes, back again. It's like old times. Good to see you. Where's the others, then?" She turned on the spot, looking all around her, and suddenly she saw Omri. She let out a shriek. "Eek, who are you?" she yelled, pointing at him. "You ain't her." "Of course it's not her, Elsa," said the older man patiently. "How could it be her? She was on her last legs 30 years ago, don't you remember?" Oh, yes. Of course I remember now, poor old duck. I didn't half cry after she sent us back that last time, knowing we'd never see her again." She gave a sentimental sniff. "Well, but who's this one, then?" she asked sharply, pointing at Omri. "And where's Jenny and the sergeant? And that thieving little tyke, what was his name?" Could it have been Bert Martin? She spun around and saw the smaller man, who had just spoken for the first time. "Bert! Yes, that was it. How could I forget you? You little villain. You've hardly changed a bit. I'd have known you on any dark night. Still on the job, I see. No rest for the wicked, eh?" "Seems like. My luck hasn't run out, neither. I don't go in for climbing drain pipes and that nowadays. Nice open ground floor window. Nobody at home, no dog, grand hall. Easy as falling off a log. Like to see what I got?" With a cocky swagger, he opened the sack he was carrying and invited her to peer inside. The older man seemed to pull himself together. "Not so much of your sauce, Bert Martin. I'm here, don't forget that." The little man seemed to recognize the older one for the first time. Though Omri knew he'd already seen him, he gave a theatrical start. "Core, if it ain't P.C. Plod, our friendly local copper, the terror of the night streets, the scourge of the criminal classes. Here, you have a look at all, why not?
There's not a lot you can do about it here, is there? He rattled his sack, which gave out a chinking sound. I could arrest you, you little weasel. Don't make me laugh. What would you do with me when you had? You're not even in uniform. I'm retired. But that don't mean scallywags like you can break the law under my very nose and get away with it. Is that so? Look here, then, constable, said Bert. He reached into his sack and brought out a minute silver teapot. He rubbed it on his sleeve and held it up for inspection. Georgian, this is. Solid. Bit of all right, eh? I got the whole set here, sugar tongs and all. And a lot more besides. Jewels, carriage clock, silver-handled walking stick. Got a sword in it, see? He whipped it out, took up a fencing stance, and made a few passes. Very nice, lot of demand among the money-eyed gentry. Fancy it for your shop window, Elsie, my old china. Do you still have your little antique business in the East End Road? You be quiet, Bert. I don't do business with the likes of you. I'm no fence. Strictly above board. Ask anybody. That's not what I heard, said Bert slyly. Elsie bridled, her hands on her bosom. What are you hinting at? That Elsie Jackson ever received stolen goods? Word is, it has been known. I've nothing to say to you. It's beneath my dignity to hold conversations with a petty criminal like you, Bert Martin, she exclaimed indignantly, turning her back on him. The little man, whom Omri realized was a burglar, laughed mockingly. Not so much of the pretty, not after tonight. Well, if you're all too law-abiding to look, I'll keep me whistle and flute to myself, he said, and closed his sack again. There was a silence, and the policeman glanced uneasily in Omri's direction. Manners, he said vaguely. Elsie caught his glance and turned toward Omri. Quite right, Ted, she said warmly. We're forgetting. Whoever he is, we wouldn't be here without him. She stepped toward Omri with one tiny hand extended genteelly, the other one nervously patting her hair. I'm Elsie Jackson, she said. Ever so sorry you caught me in a dishabille, as the French say. He touched her hand with one finger. How do you do, Mrs. Jackson? Just call me Elsie, she said with a girlish giggle. Allow me to introduce Constable Terryberry. Ex-constable, retired in 28. 28, repeated Elsie. Oh, of course. Aren't I silly? I'm before you. Goodness. What year is it for you now, Ted? 1931, said Ted. 12 years on from us, eh, Bert? And how's the world going then, Ted? Give us a preview. Oh, things is nice and quiet, at least in dear old England. Bit of a bother in other countries. Well, you'd expect it, wouldn't you? Foreigners, but nothing for us to fret about. So it really was the war to end all wars that we've just finished with, said Elsie. Thank God for that, she turned to Omri. It's still only 1919 where I live, she explained kindly. Do you all come from different times? No, more's the pity. Bert and me's contemporaneous, she said carefully. That means we're from the same time. Miss Jessie taught us that. Not that him and me move in the same social circles, of course, she added, tossing her head. Don't you ever meet in your own time, you and, The burglar leaped forward, lithe as a cat. Not if I sees her first, we don't, he said, seeing she's too high and mighty to perform the introductions. Albert Martin, Bert to my friends. They shook hands as well they could. And who might you be when you're at home? Asked Elsie coyly. My name's Omri, Omri said. What kind of foreign name is that? Asked the ex-constable suspiciously. It's a Bible name, said Omri. That's nice, isn't it, Ted? Said Elsie, giving the policeman a sharp nudge. Yeah, very nice, he muttered. Of course, Methuselah's a Bible name, too, and there's not many of them about. Nor Nebuchadnezzar, said Elsie vaguely. Still, Hamry's a very nice name, almost as good as Henry. Omri. What I said, dear. Now then, let's be sensible. These things we want to ask. I mean, it's been 30 years, and, well, you can't help being curious. Where's little Jenny? I'm afraid she died, said Omri. There was a murmur of distress in which even Bert joined. Oh, never! Exclaimed Elsie. I am sorry, poor little mite. She had a good life. She stayed here, you know. There was a sudden silence. The other three stared at each other in amazement. Stayed here? For how long? The rest of her life, 30 years. 30 years? You mean small like we are? Tiny in a giant's world, whispered Elsie. Yes, she was well looked after. Bert sat down rather suddenly on the edge of the cash box. Strike a light. 30 years. Elsie shuddered. Like a doll. I mean, I know she had a rotten life in her own time, but I mean, you'd be just like a doll. Wouldn't do for me, said Ted. I like my independence. I was always dead scared she wouldn't send us back, muttered Bert. Go on, she wasn't like that, not Miss Jessie. She'd never have kept us against our will. No, she wouldn't, said Bert. He gave a meaningful look to Omri. They all exchanged glances and then looked at Omri. Their little faces were suddenly pale and strained. What's wrong? He asked. You ain't going to keep us here? Bert asked anxiously, all his bravado gone. I mean, with her, she'd bring us every now and again, but it was only to pass the time, like, to keep her company. I didn't mind once I got the hang of it, but there was never no question of us not going back. I don't know so much, put in Ted the policeman, with anxiety in his tone. You remember Sergeant Ellis, Charlie? He was always restless, going on about his duty, how he had to get back to his regiment and fight Bonnie. And Miss Jessie used to get him and tell her about used to get him to tell her about the war and that. He turned to Omri. He was from Bonnie's time, Napoleon Bonaparte, you know, and when he'd describe the battle, she'd say, I'm not sending you back to that, Charlie Ellis. You're staying here. That's right. I remember now. There was big quarrels, him wanting to go back on to do his duty and her wanting to keep him safe. She was right, said Omri soberly. They all looked at him again. Right? What do you mean? He unrolled the fourth hanky and showed them the pitiful remains of Sergeant Charlie Ellis. Bert blew out his breath in a low whistle. You mean? She sent him back all right, and he got killed. There was a shocked silence. Then Ted picked up the red uniform jacket. He lifted it to his nose. Damp, he said. Well, not now, but it's been damp. Look, it's got patches of green mold on it. He touched the tip of his tongue to the stained cloth. Salt. I wonder, remember? Elsie, Miss Jessie used to tell him, there's a big sea battle coming up, and it'll be terrible if you don't want to be in that. It was Trafalgar she meant. You and I knew that, but Charlie used to say, if Nelson needs me... That was a victory for us, though, wasn't it? Said Omri. Trafalgar, when Nelson was killed? Ted nodded. We won all right, but many good men died to give us the victory, and Charlie, he must have been one of them. Was he in the Navy? Asked Omri. No, Army, but they always had to have soldiers on the ships, the sailors. I'm not saying they weren't brave, but they was pressed, not volunteers. They grabbed them off the streets and forced them to serve. And there had to be soldiers on board the ships to make sure they did their duty. He shook his head. Elsie was straightening out the uniform trousers. Poor Charlie. He was a good lad, always cheerful, one for a joke, though not always the kind ladies ought to hear. Lucky I'm no prude. She shed a tear over the helmet and laid it down tenderly amid the handkerchief lace. Ted was very subdued. He was Irish. He believed in leprechauns and I don't know what. It was him led us to understand we was part of a bit of magic, not drunk, nor dreaming, nor dead. That was what I always thought when she first brung us, Bert interjected. I thought I'd been topped. You will be in all one of these fine days, said Ted. This is the 20th century. They don't hang a man for burglary nowadays. In Charlie's day they did, said Bert. He was always on me to reform, said I'd come to a sticky end. Well, he did and I didn't, which only goes to show. It shows the good die young, said Elsie tartly. And there we will pause.